Welcome, everybody, to the show. Joining us tonight is our regular co host and fellow traveler, Dan, the Dan Noodles Man, the Franz Kafka of Wargaming. And our very special guest this evening is legendary wargame designer and SPI veteran, Mr. Danny Parker. Danny, thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Great to be here, guys. As you know, I just said, put me on just so I can gab and we can talk and visit. That's
Yeah,
all.
you have an open invitation as far as I'm concerned to show up whenever you want. So,
So, anyway, great to be here, and we'll talk about some stuff, and we'll see if maybe your viewership will like it or
well, we'll
find
we'll
something
we'll
entertaining.
we will open
Sure
up
they
with
will. Sure they will.
with the last gamble. And of course, Danny, we've been over all this before in the previous video. But what's your take on how well Last Gamble is being received in the wargaming community? I know our mutual buddy Rick speaks glowingly of it at every opportunity, and I think he may be playing it with us at Winterfest.
Um, Actually, the take I'm seeing from people is kind of what I expected. There are people who look at it and say, "Wow, this has everything from soup to nuts in it," and it does. And then there's others who say, "Hey, this thing has everything from soup to nuts, and it's complicated, and there's a lot to remember." And I'm going to leave this on the shelf or whatever because it does. And one of the things we'll talk about on the show tonight, I do have a minor topic to discuss, which is in these games how we deal with surprise and uncertainty. And there's different philosophies in terms of how that's handled. And we went one way with the last gamble, and it's possible to do other takes different other ways. And it's well, it's a different flavor, it's a different preference, and there's those aspects to it. But uh, first, I would need to straightforward answer your question, which is I'm pleased with the response we've gotten on the game, and I think people in the hobby recognize, this old guy is really trying to give us something and trying to really give us his something that's uh, a resource for the hobby, because one of the things that you can be against and be sure to fail is say, I never want to see another new Bulge game. So that's a way of making sure that you'll be disappointed soon.
We say
Because
that kind of thing as we are writing the check or pressing a button on our computer screen that says complete order. I'm never buying another one of
I'm
these.
never buying another.
Click.
Why are there so many of them? And sadly, I'm in the situation of that's all I've done. And so it doesn't mean I haven't thought about doing other things, but it's like if you're really going to be a detail guy and you're going to evaluate things to the nines, then you can't wander too far unless you figure a way to live as long as Methuselah. So I can't haven't figured that out.
Now,
So
in terms of different modeling approaches, though, I'm very much warming to this question actually, because you yourself have done a number of different approaches to this topic, right? I mean, our classic Ardennes squad here is, I think, a pretty straightforward simulation, as we might have seen at the time, and the Last Gamble, on the other hand, is a very robust modern simulation of the same topic.
well, but there are differences from some other games that are out there now that are
Mm-hmm.
deal with the bulge, where we're still using largely a lot of the approaches that were used earlier, because that's what I used and that's what I was used to. And so there are different ways of handling this. For instance, I would say that the old method of dealing, since the Ardennes offensive and the Battle of the Bulge at the beginning anyway was dominated by the surprise that the Germans achieved. They basically caught everyone unaware. How do you simulate that? And the answer is you can't, but completely. But I've discussed with John Butterfield an idea for a completely different game that would probably take too long for us to discuss here. That would allow you to capture that element of surprise. But let's say that you're really going to do the bulge, then there's no way that the Allied player is going to say, I never saw this coming, that the Germans are going to whack me, because everybody knows that's what's going to happen. You're going to get whacked. And so the question is, since that happens, how do you make it so that the advantage that the Germans enjoyed at the beginning, how that's reflected in the game? And I would say the old method, the one that I still use, is I would call it pronounced guardrails. That might be a good way of describing it, where you say, well, I'm going to have some structure so that I prevent you from doing things that where you know exactly what you're facing, and you're going to take advantage of that and make it so that the game is not reflective of what actually happened.
Mm-hmm.
And so you say, well, in this version, we're going to basically forbid you from using that information.
Mm-hmm.
But there are other ways of dealing with that. And, I had a long discussion with two guys I respect a lot that Mark Herman and Frank Davis about
Mm-hmm.
this question. And, oh, yeah, Dan knows those guys too.
I'm
But
not sure he's ever met Frank, even online, but we've had Mark on the show any number of times, and
yeah,
he is always a delight.
Frank is just kind of obsessed with this question and has been for a while. And, one of the advantages of finding people that are obsessed with something is, and unless they're a dimwit, they're going to learn some things that can be useful. And Frank, on the uncertainty question and on the surprise question, this is breakfast for him, like Divine Wind that I don't know, Divine Wind that wind is taking a while to come, but he's really thought about this, and he likes the idea that one of the ways to handle this is you just make it so that you can't necessarily activate units, and then when you activate them, they may not do what you say they will do, and this sort of thing. And that's one approach. Or you draw chits and say, well, and you structure that so that you're not going to get full freedom that you want.
Mm-hmm.
But in the last gamble, I'd say we're using a structure where we pretty much make it so that the information you have that is information you shouldn't have, that the actual combatants did not have, we make it so that we forbid you to use some of that. And that makes it so that it may be frustrating for players. And actually, I'm kind of interested for the people out there that are tuning in. I'm interested in your preference and what your thoughts are on this particular question. Do you like guardrails where you say, like, don't do that, or there are rules forbidding you to do that? Special rules are often called. Or do you prefer something where it's more randomized? Uh, so anyway, I'm curious about that.
Well, I will let the chat weigh in, but I suspect most people are going to kind of fall on a spectrum somewhere where they feel like there's a balance to be struck, and where they personally are comfortable with their own balance, I think is going to vary person to person. You mentioned it before the show, so I'll ask what your impressions of Dean Essig's solution to that to a related question worked for last Blitzkrieg, which I have played. Actually, I thought it was so essentially, for those who don't know, there's a snafu table that will determine to what extent any given formation can react. And there is an initial bonus to the Germans on that table that is in effect for the first 3 days or something like that. And then eventually it rolls into a -1 penalty.
Right, right. Well, I actually I think that is a good illustration of the method that Frank's advocated. And the thing about this is Frank hasn't advocated this since he's been working on Divine Wind. He's advocated this to me for a long time, and
Mm-hmm.
he likes the idea that there are set piece battles where both commanders they really know what's going on, and even in the Ardennes. Later on if you do scenarios that happen later on in the battle, everybody's kind of clued in about what's up, and so that this issue isn't as big then. But I think uh, the way it's being handled in the last Blitzkrieg is nice, and I think it handsomely illustrates the other approach. Uh, and in what we have in the last gamble, you may say, well, I really am unhappy that the designer is making me move the Seventh Armored Division to St. Vith because the Germans are plowing through there. Can't they see that? And so but I do. I make it so that you have to go there because when the 106th Division surrendered, I think it was on the 22nd of December, when they surrendered, it was the largest surrender of U.S. Combatants since Bataan. So it was a real disaster. So there's no way you're going to say, we're walking away. You guys are hopeless. We're not going to get to you. We need to go block Germans that we know are coming through the Amblev area. So good luck. So that wasn't happening. So they were given a mission to figure out how to rescue them. And then eventually they were stuck in place because they were sent to rescue them and their rescue was impossible. They were surrendering. So anyway, there are different approaches to this. And we use one approach. And one thing I do like about the approach we have is you will get the fortified goose egg is something that will occur in the game. The question is how will you be able to maintain it, and as a German, how much attention will you pay to it? So anyway, I find that we handle it in the last gamble, but also the last Blitzkrieg is using a different way of handling it, and there are a lot of nuances associated with that too. But anyway, this is not an unusual problem to have. As
No.
I mentioned to you, already before the show, discussion I had with Mark Herman was about Chancellorsville, which is, you say you did a really careful evaluation of all the forces, you counted muskets, and you looked at the proficiency of the formations and whatever. You say we got them all set up and they're in the right positions, and as few rules as possible, let's go at it. And unless those few rules don't include some factors for McClellan in terms of how that was going to be handled, then you're going to find it tough to make it end up like it was. But that's one of the things I like about what Mark does is he's really devoted to artfully finding solutions to a lot of these things. And I think a lot of what he's done within the Rebel Fury series is really wonderful. So,
Danny, um, where do you get your passion and your expertise for bulge material other than reading? Like, what made you get into that? Are you a military man? Meaning that was your father a military man, your grandfather?
well, my father and grandfather were not if you go back to my great grandfather, he fought at Shiloh on the wrong side and and this came back to the farm and said, I'm done with that. I'm not going to be in the, I'm not going to be working with the Confederacy any longer or anyone else. So, no, I've been interested in this because, uh, as a young person, that there was a time where that was true. I love chess and I love playing chess, and Avalon Hill said it was like chess, only more challenging. So I started playing these things, and I liked them, and also I loved reading, and so when Battle of the Bulge came out in 1965, it had McAuliffe on the cover claiming that this was absolutely authentic, and he signed off on it.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's this, it is absolutely authentic. This is the real thing. This is what happened, and it happened in the last year of the war. And I've told this story many times, but maybe some of the viewers haven't heard it. But we played the heck out of that thing, and it was very hard for us to figure out how to keep the Americans on the coffee table. They were blue, and the Germans were pink, and the pink took over the coffee table. And then I was thinking, well, I must be a really bad player because I was playing the Americans. But then finally, my friend Mark allowed me to switch. And then I was able to send him on his ass off the coffee table as the American too. So, you know, there are people who can play that game still for tournament play, I guess, and
Hmm.
they can do better than what we were able to do. But I was very curious about that from the position that it happened in the last year of the war. Anthony McAuliffe said this thing is absolutely authentic, and yet it looked like that it was a bloodbath for the Americans. So I read about it, and then uh, then I wrote a really long letter to Avalon Hill as a 14-year-old, I think, or maybe I was a year older or something. But anyway, I never heard back from them. But I did hear back from Jim Dunnigan, who had been at Avalon Hill and had gotten that letter, and uh, he was at SPI and is like, we're interested in doing historical games, better games, and he was really interested in the Ardennes and the Bulge too. A game called that came out in the magazine called Bastogne was out,
Hmm.
and he was working on other things, and really smart guy. But anyway, he said he kind of trusted me to figure out how to learn about this and turn it into a game, because I liked the folio games that they were coming out with. Right, they were coming out these quads like Napoleon's Last Battles, pretty nice. The idea of having different sections of a battle and you can play them quickly. And I told Jim, I said, I think we can figure out how to do that. And that's what the game behind you is. That's what that ended up being, except that there was one quadrant of the map that had nothing going on in 1944, but it did in 1940. So, um, we we did one where Sedan was, so the 1940 scenarios are in there, and I worked with
Hmm.
Jim. But that's a long response to your question, Dan, about how did I get involved with this. And then once I started, since I was really serious about it, I've never been able to stop. So the other thing that happened is I was at the National Archives for a lot of this, working on the game stuff for Simulations Publications. And then I got a call from George Wagner, who was at the archives, saying, hey, would you mind me putting you in contact with this man who's a former deputy chief of military history? He's working on a book on the Battle of the Bulge, and I told him that there's this kid who knows a lot about the German records that are here. I said, sure, you can do that. So that was Charles McDonald, and we developed a relationship, and it was a terrific thing. Great guy.
And
Anyway.
Danny, has your passion taken you to the Ardennes?
I was there in December. I've been there a bunch of times, and not recently very much, but I was there for a book launch. I did a bunch of books, or four, I think, on the career of Joachim Peiper, who was, of course, Battle Group Peiper in the Ardennes, and there's a book called Peiper's Last Gamble, not The Last Gamble, but Peiper's Last Gamble, about Peiper in the Ardennes, and that comes out. It's released in February, although we got copies of it for the book launch in the Ardennes in December. And so I led a tour there, I think December 6th through the 9th, something like that. And so we had a good old time. Yeah, so I've been to the Ardennes.
And it must be an emotional experience, nevertheless, eh?
I think it's an emotional experience, seeing people that you worked with a long time ago, because I've written a lot more books than about the Battle of the Bulge than I have
I grabbed the nearest one off the shelf.
right than I have games. And so so because one of the things that happened with working with McDonald is I was contacted by other SPI guy, Dave Isby, who a lot of you will know. And Isby said, hey, I'm working on books on such and such, and somebody's looking for a sort of coffee table book on the Battle of the Bulge. Would you be interested in doing that? So I did that, and that was published in 1991. And then a book on the air war above the Ardennes called To Win the Winter Sky, that appeared in 1994. Then two books, one of them but already just showed, about edited stories from the German generals involved, telling what they thought happened and so forth. So that's.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you. In '65, Peiper was still alive, right?
Oh yeah, he died on Bastille Day in 1976.
'76. Okay. No one ever contacted him on his.
Oh, they contacted him a lot.
He never. He never cooperated.
The
No,
meetings
he
were
cooperated
probably
with
not
different
held
people.
publicly.
Excuse me for interrupting. I didn't mean to do that.
Oh, I'm
So
sorry.
he cooperated with a lot of people. He was he was an arrogant guy, but also smart, very smart guy, and proud of his record. And he was a National Socialist to the end. So
He was tried. He was tried as a war criminal,
yes, he was, and he was sentenced to death, but that was later commuted, and then he was released. And let's see, when was it? I'll think of that in a moment. But anyway, he was released, and he was out, released from Landsberg, and then worked for Porsche, and then Volkswagen, and he translated books. Lived in Eastern France, and I think probably my best book about him is one called Hitler's Warrior, because he kind of epitomized what Himmler and Hitler thought would be the perfect kind of warrior guy. And
Jesus.
so, uh, it's a good book and an entertaining book. If you're really interested in the what happened in the Ardennes in this most recent book, you'll love it because it deals with all the things that war gamers often want to know. Like how what happened at the bridge at Stavelot, for instance.
I mean,
Which
he was pretty ruthless. This guy, man.
yeah, no
Peiper.
question about
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Now,
That's right.
is there any credence given to that ruthlessness in the game?
I had toyed with the idea of SS commit atrocities being some rule, but they did, but it's not. It actually cheapens the the event in my mind because they did, but it's not any. You shouldn't game that. I
No,
just don't
I'm
feel.
talking about his tactics. Actually,
Well, yeah, his tactics were uh, a charge, full on, all guns blazing, and he was always big on the fact that his command, if everyone was running the German army the way he was, that they would have been unstoppable,
well,
and they would have been unstoppable to some extent, but they would have also had incredible level of casualties because they did. His
hence the
command,
arrogance.
yeah, yeah. So, uh, but in the way this translates on the battlefield, though, his unit was really effective. And it was effective, and in the last gamble, we really capture some of this because he was famous for night attacks because he always said that night is the friend to the weak, because your opponent has no idea what you have or what's going on, and if you surprise them at 4 a.m., they don't know what's going on. So um, you can have your way with them for a period of time until they realize that you're a platoon that broke through somehow. Anyway, um, because he was really good at night combat and night assaults, he was given the role to break through to the Meuse River probably at night and reach the river at night. And so in the game, we have rules that cover maximum effort within the armies. You can have a unit that's designated that's going to be your prime spearhead. It's going to be either in the 5th Panzer Army or the 6th Panzer Army, and so he will be that for the 6th Panzer Army. And so there's a chance that he'll suddenly surprise you in terms of movement and combat on the night of the 17th or the night of the 18th, and you don't know. And as a German player, you don't know either, because one of the things that's strange that happened is Peiper stopped mysteriously on the night of the 17th, just above Stavelot, when the bridge was open, and he could have gone through it. But I think it was because not sleeping for 3 or 4 days, and there's disagreements with some people over this, but I think earlier in the war he was abusing Pervitin, and I think it's continued. So, but I am also telling you that other people don't agree with me, but that's okay. Everybody gets to have their opinion, right or wrong.
I just saw something yesterday, and I forget who was the narrator or the producer of it on YouTube, but he said one of the one of the witnesses there witnessed all the German soldiers, and they obviously knew they were so high on meth, like because they were just shooting people and going about their business, like
Yeah.
like it was
Well,
it was
in Russia they did that. If a civilian showed themselves, they were shot. So you just if you were going to survive, don't be seen. So and then the people under Piper, I interviewed a lot of them, and a lot of what I've done are interviews, and they one Piper's adjutant was very careful to make sure I understood this distinction. He said there's a big difference between shooting prisoners and not taking them. So of course, if you're a prisoner, the that that distinction may not matter in terms of your survival, but in terms of the way the Waffen SS looked at it, you prisoners are a problem to have, but you don't take them, you don't have it. So, and in Russia, many were killed. Uh, it's ruthless, but on both sides. So it appears like that war was really brutal and inhumane. Uh, there's a author, if you're interested in that, his name is Omar Bartov. If you want to study what happened in the East that way. But anyway,
This is a great question. I happen to know, Danny, that you do play things other than Bulge games. Are there any other topics or specific games that you've played in recent years, I guess, that you think are worth pointing out?
to be honest, I really have. My son and I, we haven't done it for the last couple of years, but we in the summer we like to try to find a game on Gettysburg and try it again, because I really like the Gettysburg as a situation. Uh, but I haven't been necessarily that great at choosing games to play. So anyway, but that I really enjoy, because one of the things about the Ardennes that you realize if you're uh, simulating this or creating a game is, the Germans are, quote, not going to win in terms of really altering the war. But Gettysburg, I feel that's different, so things did hinge somewhat on what happened at Gettysburg. And uh, there are probably viewers who will know more about this than I, but I love Coddington's book about this, because there was, if the Confederacy had won a large victory and also had been able to attract the French as partners, then things could have gone quite differently. So, and Gettysburg is really an interesting situation too. Um, uh, and that's one of the things I admire about Mark Herman, because he's really worked on this, and he's quite good at it. And actually, he's quite good at everything he does relative to these things. So, and one of the advantages I had working on the old Battles for the Ardennes was I had John Butterfield as a developer, when he was a nobody. No one knew who he was. I met him and I thought, this guy is great. And he was basically like at SPI, he was able to figure out how to channel and run the Friday night playtest group, that was a bit of a challenge, because uh, it was like a 3-ring circus, maybe, but no, maybe 10 rings, because there's all these games going on at the same time.
How many people would show up for those?
That's a good question. So, my joke always was Berg stuff, because there was a campaign for North Africa room where no one was allowed in without checking with somebody, because you could not be altered, so don't alter anything. But when Berg was working on Terrible Swift Sword, that was there was a lot of people who were interested in that, a lot of people who were enjoying that. And Frank was working on Wellington's Victory, which I still think is very credible simulation. He was surprising that he didn't get fired, because one of the things that Jim Dunnigan always wanted to tell everybody about if you were designing was you had freedom, but there's that when there was a reason a deadline was had the word dead in it, because you finished or else you were out. And there were people who really took a long time, but Frank was the one that I can remember that was able to really push that in some fashion. But he was also extremely good. And so, but back to the question of numbers, there were a lot of different games going on. Like Isby was working on To the Green Fields Beyond, and there was Operation Typhoon was in progress, and that got pushed into another room since that, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There might be 20 or 30 people, on Friday. And it really got going. You think it really got going at 9, but it really was still really going later. So it just kept going. And, but it was SPI at that point was an entertaining place to be. And I had a big friendship with Joe Bolkowski because Joe was working on Wacht am Rhein, which was really Jim's design that had been given to him, but really then Joe took it over, and then Joe didn't have enough time to do it, and and then yet he was still standing by what was required for the with the deadline to get this thing out. So Joe really had the limitations relative to that. But so, and then different designers handled this differently, in terms of how they dealt with the playtesters, and then how much was enough, you know. So, but it was a very active place. It was a very there were a lot of people that could be at academia getting a PhD. I think that they were playing games and doing stuff. It was fun. It was really and then you couldn't do this. You couldn't generally just get invited to a table without knowing somebody or some special invite. But I was able to wrangle that periodically, so I was able to play different things, and that's always quite fun. Like I
Danny,
remember. Yeah, go ahead.
sorry about that. Would you say that having that deadline looming over you is a good school, or do you need more time, or do games come out drastically unfinished? Blah blah blah.
Well, yeah,
Sometimes.
that's a good question, Dan. I mean, I think different people are able to deal with that differently, in terms of, and there was one, Frank Davis, who just said, "No, I'm not finished," and he really took Jim to the carpet on Wellington's Victory on terms of getting that thing out, but he did. But others would abide by it and they would stick to it. And I think, for instance, Joe was pretty good about sticking to it. So he was very good, but designs would suffer sometimes because you didn't have the time necessary to do what I like, which is really to really love it and to spend time refining it. And one of the advantages with The Last Gamble is we took longer to do The Last Gamble than we took by far than we did with the original Battles for the Ardennes. And I had Rich Hoffman working with me, the developer, extremely thorough and disciplined guy.
Sharp
And,
as a razor.
yeah, really disciplined guy. And it could not have been done without him. And then we have this crazy Scotsman, Andrew Delecky, who was forever trying to give us more complicated rules about how to introduce the British or not. Oh, goodness gracious. But anyway, you know, Bill Thomas did tell me that he thought that we would never finish, but we took 6 years to finish it. And I think with the original Battles of the Ardennes, I took half that time. So anyway, I actually think being able to spend a luxurious amount of time on something that you really care about that says that it's historic representation, that's an advantage for players. With this game, with the Last Gamble, people may say it's, and in fact, I remember seeing a review. It said too much, and I thought, well, that's good. Only 2 words, and they were able to capture what they wanted to say about this. Too much. So, there is the possibility of distilling things and creating something that captures without providing everything. Like for instance, we have V1s in the game in the Last Gamble, which is they're just annoying. They're like having mosquitoes in your room. Do they have mosquitoes in summer up in Canada?
Are you kidding me, man?
I would
They
assume.
have big ones. They
I-
probably
I-
bigger.
I would have asked the same question until I read more about Murmansk, which apparently is a pestilential swamp in the summer months. Both of
Oh.
them.
Yeah. Well, anyway, the V1s are just annoying. They're just, but there they are. They're interesting, annoying, and they, it's like going to Vegas. There's a chance of really getting incredibly lucky and hitting the 20 million gallon fuel dump at Angler. I mean, it's not likely, but it could happen. And actually, in the actual campaign, 200,000 gallons were detonated by one hit. So anyway, so we have everything from soup to nuts in there. But Rich was really disciplined, and he would add some. He at first, for a long time, that was an optional rule, and he said, this is just entertaining. So, and I've had this conversation with Artie. These games, we should, since they can be difficult and they require a lot of attention and they require a lot of study relative to the rules and getting the time to play them, we should kind of accentuate the funny and fun stuff that we can in the games that become entertaining. And Rich said, the V1s are just annoying, but they're kind of fun annoying. So they're in there, and we have a bunch of other things, like the way we treat commandos in the game is a little different than what you've seen before, and they're for the German player they're an advantage, but they're not dependable.
Well, hold on a second. I never knew there were V1s in the Bulge.
Yeah, they were launching 40 every 2 hours, something like that.
Bloody hell!
Yeah, they're launching a lot of them. So the idea was, since Goring couldn't run the Luftwaffe to contest Allied air power, there was the idea that, hey, we'll just use the V1s, and rather than attacking London, we'll make the Allied rear area a mess, and that's what we'll do with them. And so they're in the game, and we tried to make it so that they approximate what their actual effect was, which was probably twofold. One, to be annoying for the Allied player, but two, to be disappointing for the German player in terms of like, nope, that's not doing what we want. It's not the same as all those planes that the Allied player is getting. So anyway, yeah.
The game had, first of all, Lee Grant, thanks so much for the support. It is much appreciated. I would like you to tell us how air in general, like the Allied air as well, is being modeled in the game, because we've kind of seen, I've personally seen, and I haven't played that many Bulge games, relatively speaking, a lot of different ways to handle it, from an abstract set of points that you spend on road interdiction or whatever, to actual dogfights happening in the air over the map. How does Last Gamble handle that?
So we don't get down to individual dogfights. We do have something where there's a player that's trying to influence ground battle, let's say, and you can go and contest them and nullify them, maybe, depending on how skilled you are. Like as a German player, your skill level is not good enough. So a lot of the time you can try that and it doesn't work. So anyway, um, uh, but you can also try to interdict bridges. Um, you can try to influence ground combat. You can try to attack the fuel dump, um, and the and also you can try to increase the cost of going down roads. For instance, the Germans, believe it or not, since they couldn't survive putting planes over the battlefield a lot very well during the daytime to be shot down, they had a bunch of aging Ju-87 Stukas that they about 200 planes, Ju-88s and Ju-87s that they would send to attack Allied forces at night, and they would drop flares and um, try to bomb convoys and so forth. So the Snake Eyes, our blackouts were important because the Germans were active that way. So you have that, and then in the game, believe it or not, there are two units that the German player will like. One of them is the ME-262 unit, which is Kate Kampfgeschwader 51, which was actually in the battle, and it can't be intercepted. Oh, I forgot interception. You can decide as the Allied player, the Germans have a lot of planes. I'm going to go intercept them all before they get to the battlefield. But you can't do that with the jets. And there's the ME-262 unit, and there's also a Kampfgeschwader 76, which is the Arado 234 jets. Bombers, and they're pinpricks in terms of being able to do a lot, but they are in the game. And so, again, I feel like a lot of this is about color. I want players to feel like, this is really making you feel like I'm seeing all the different elements, important and not. So the important ones are like supplies. Supply really matters. Supply is really important, and German supply is fragile and difficult from the beginning. But it also includes lots of other ancillary stuff that's potentially important, like for instance, weather effects on movement. In fog, uh, zones of control weren't what you had hoped they would be in terms of being able to create a cordon to prevent enemy units from moving around you. So during the day, during good visibility, fine, but during fog or at night, not so. And especially in certain types of terrain like forest or woods. So anyway, we tried to have a game that captures all these different elements so you can feel like most things are being addressed in some fashion. So
How dense is the Ardennes?
you mean in terms of forest?
Yeah.
Well, you can get between trees and walking, but there's no way you're going to decide to go take a truck or a half track or a tank and go through the woods often without some kind of path. You're not going to be able to do that very well. And so one of the things that's in the game is the Germans actually came extremely close to capturing a bunch of fuel. They were within 2 kilometers of 2 million gallons of gasoline, and you would say, well, they would have torched that, but they couldn't because they could not torch. They could not. They would set, well, one, you'd create a large forest fire, but you'd also this was really a problem. And with Liège, when it looked like the Germans might capture Liège, there was like, what are we going to do with all this stuff that they had stockpiled there? Someone said, well, we'll set fire to the gasoline. You can't do that because you'll burn a lot of the city. You set the city on fire, and then so there was all these problems with trying to evacuate this stuff, but no one ever expected the Germans would come through. But in the game, there is a possibility that you can capture some of that stuff. The problem for the German player, though, is if you capture it, that doesn't mean that you're able to distribute it. So the unit that captured it, oh man, they've got plenty of gas, got all of everything you captured, but moving that elsewhere requires trucks, and the German war machine was really short on trucks too. So
Hmm. Especially by 1944.
So
right.
you know what? The Piper, being an intelligent man, knew that this was basically a um, not a suicide mission, but a useless. It was useless.
He was used to those, though. They had been doing those for a while. Sorry to say that,
Fair.
Dan, but so I think Piper himself wrote in what was it after in 1943 in the summer, the war is lost. So he knew the war was lost, but
In 43, man. Holy moly.
Well,
yeah,
year of decision.
yeah, the war is lost uh, when they and Piper was in the attack on at Kursk. He was involved in that.
Really, eh?
He got the close combat badge for destroying a tank with a Panzerfaust at close range. And anyway, he was all about just being a warrior. So the idea was the way the Waffen SS had it is, that was where glory lay, was and probably you weren't going to survive it, but somebody like Piper did survive it. Um, but part of that, I think, had to do with his connections, because his wife was formerly Himmler's secretary, and that
Didn't
made it
Himmler
so.
have an affair with the secretary?
Well, Himmler had two secretaries, but the one that was the mistress was the best friends with the Piper's wife. And actually, in Hitler's Warrior, in that book, I was able to find at Stanford the letters that she and Piper exchanged from the war front. And nobody else recognized him, but I recognized his handwriting. And then once I recognized these things, they were tremendous in terms of, I think that chapter is called Letters from the War. But it's fantastic.
Hold on, Danny. You
Yes.
discovered Piper's letter, Himmler's secretary's letters at Stanford University. Nobody
At
knew.
Hoover
Nobody knew
Institution.
about this.
Yeah, actually, I've got a good story. It was like a rainy day, and I was there. So I was working on these books, and I thought, well, they have some photo albums there at the Hoover Institution. I want to see those. Maybe Piper will be in there. And I spent all day, and I looked all day, and then I didn't really find much of anything. And then I think the woman who was the archivist, her name was Linda Wheeler. She said, "Now, and it was pouring rain outside, which never happens in that part of California. But anyway." She said, "We do have this one box of miscellaneous stuff that nobody knows what it is. Would you like to see this?" And they close at 5, and this is at 4:30. And so I said, "Sure." So she brings it in. I pull out a folder, and then I open it up, and I immediately see his handwriting. And I said, "You close at 5?" So what ability do we have to find a Xerox machine or a copying machine or whatever? So she helped me copy this stuff, and then they were transcribed from the handwritten ones to German, and then professionally translated, and they're terrific, because Piper's describing his experiences on the war front,
Bloody hell!
and she's describing what's going on back at uh, with on the home life, where she's had Himmler's male child. So anyway, crazy stuff, but it's real. It really happened, and uh, yeah, that was a great day.
Bloody hell!
And by the way, I found the originals for that were at the Bundesarchiv in Koblenz. So anyway, and there were a few other things that they had. So I've been, I'm really a digger. I'm really a researcher, probably more than a designer of games. Although with these games, I've kind of bet my career on them in terms of as a historian and as somebody who loves these games. I like these games. They're fun. One of the great things is Avalon Hill was right. It is like chess, only more challenging. And it can be dang fun. And so what Rich is suggesting, let's add some humor to this thing to the extent that we can. You know, it's good when we can entertain ourselves, get up with some friends, share some food or eat something, and uh, then be able to enjoy, you know, the competitive aspect of playing these things and enjoy what the designer and developer have set out for you too. You know, they've created a meal that you're going to have, and it's you may not like it, or you may like it, or you may say, I'll have more. So, but anyway, that's one of the great things about this. It's a good hobby because I think there are a lot of people who are really dedicated to it, and people are really uh, they're really working on it. And then the old guard that I still worked with then, they're still around, and some like Butterfield is, you know, he's of course is there, you know, and Mark Herman. I mean, those are really famous people right now, really relative to the hobby, and they should be. You know, John's a super clever guy, and so's Mark. So
Mhm.
anyway, and so's
Danny,
Frank, but you won't see Frank very much. He does show me whenever I see him what's currently going on Divine Wind, and it's a trip. I mean, it really is a trip. Wait until you know, like the whole, and we've had these discussions about code breaking. You know, what if the Japanese had decided to invest in code breaking rather than the Americans having magic to break open what the Japanese were doing? What if it went the other way? You know,
Oof.
so right? You know,
Potentially quite nasty, wouldn't it be?
well,
wouldn't
you
it
know,
be? And so, you know, Frank's basically to the point where it's like, well, wait, Japanese culture would really have trouble with that because it wouldn't be honorable in some way to you know. But
There was
let's
some
get
level of
real.
realism amongst
Let's
the
get
military
well,
real.
leadership.
Let's get real. You know. So anyway, that's what's great about this hobby is you have people like that working on really unusual things like what Frank's doing and what the other guys I just mentioned are doing that
Hmm.
makes it so that we have good games to play.
and Danny, you mentioned developers. Um, are games as developed today as they were when you were at SPI?
Actually, I'd say Rich is more thorough than anyone I've ever worked with. But John Butterfield was great to work with on the original development. Uh, and he was also a lot of fun because when I came to New York, he'd say, "Oh, why don't you come such and such? We've got a big campaign game going, and it's a lot of fun, and you know you'll enjoy it." And I would go, and it was, you know, we'd have a great time. And we there was other things to play too, and you would see other developers at work. So development was not, I would say, Dan, it wasn't necessarily consistent. So you had some designers who were just kind of taking over that, and then others where they didn't. Like a person that's often forgotten that really had a huge influence on the hobby is Redmond, and he really understood a lot about what was going on with the hobby too. And it's still, you know, he's still, were he alive, he would still be reminding everybody to take care of the things that Rich and I have been saying. You know, if we have a really complicated game, yeah, the last game was not like Campaign from North Africa, but it's certainly not easy. And if you're going to do that, you better have some stuff in it where you say like F and A, this is good. I like this. Like, for instance, I saw somebody had made a comment like, what other game shows uh, German railguns supporting von der Heide after the parachute operation lands? I said, yeah, that's right, because that was the plan, was that those railguns would support von der Heide after they landed, but um, they had to have a radio operating for that to work, and the radio busted on the drop. But in the game, you roll a die to see if it survives, and if it survives, then yeah, and you know you do have the possibility of calling the railguns, and that's fun. You know, we need these things in games that make it so that we have something that's a little special, a little unusual, when it can pique our interest and make it even more fun than it was,
This
and
is
make it more
interest.
fun.
There's an interesting, I think, question or angle to explore here too, which is, complexity in general. And I tend to fall into the camp that you're describing, Danny. With
Sorry for both of us.
I like to see a lot of those individual aspects that could potentially be abstracted out. And is there a point at which it becomes too much to deal with? Sure, but
Absolutely, it
my
is. And I would say, for instance, the V1s that are in there for fun, or the rail guns, things like that. It's like, no, jettison that. It's not going to make a big difference. But go ahead. You had a point you wanted to make. My point is,
oh, that was it.
if you're going to have complexity, you better have something to. You better have some spice that's going to go with that. That's going to help. Like everyone always talks in campaign for North Africa about the nutty pasta rule, right?
Mhm.
So, and
Literally came up on social media today.
well, there's a reason why that comes up, and there's a reason why it should come up, and that's the same reason why the the German railguns could end up supporting the paratroopers if they land. So anyway, these oddball things are, and we're dealing with a simulation where it's not the same as me writing a story. It's like we're creating an alternative history based on the game,
Hmm.
the way it goes. For instance, if Piper doesn't fall asleep on the night of the 17th, watch out. I sent you an email showing Vassal progress made by Rich doing a solo playthrough, where the allied player has taken a lot of losses that were probably ill-advised at the beginning, rather than trading it for territory. But anyway, it's showing the 18 p.m. turn, and the Piper is broken out, and the Germans are kind of advancing into a vacuum, and it's a mess for the Allied player. That could have happened. And one of the things I want in the game is that you have these possibilities of things going differently depending on how the game is played, and then also the experience of players playing it. So if you and you learn, how to play better too, and that's part of what makes it something where you'll be interested in playing it again.
Hmm.
One thing I would like to see, actually,
Pulling that up.
oh, you're pulling that up.
I got
Yeah,
that pulled up.
yeah. So I don't know if people can see that out there, but
Yeah.
all the black and white units are German SS units, and then the tan ones are the U.S. player, and all the white symbols are bridges that were found. There's a bridge discovery rule that were found to be blown. So anyway, uh, there is a possibility that can happen in the game depending on the way it's played, and it's useful to consider that is how it can go differently. One of the things I'd like to see, and I guess I'm going to challenge the wargaming world out there, is I care about Bulge games. I'd love to see a bunch of different Bulge games that were going simultaneously over the same time frame, and maybe round robin play so the players are being moved around. I don't know. Have to think about that part. But
Talk to Randy Heller about that. He could make that happen. It would be
nuts.
it would be Fitter Woods,
but I would love to see also too Gettysburg, right?
Fair.
Here's
that's Dan's alleged tobacco.
I see. Alleged tobacco.
Alleged
Okay.
tobacco. That's the
Anyway.
joke. Of course, it is actually tobacco.
Obviously.
Well, probably.
It is probably tobacco.
We're not there to
You're right.
smell what's going on.
You're
But
right.
anyway, there are, something where it's really, the situation's really received a lot of attention, like Gettysburg or Bulge. There's a few others. It would be useful for us to just kind of see how these different games are working. Are they showing similar things? Like, I have noticed one thing in particular in Bulge games, that any Bulge game that's working at all will show that the southern sector for the Allied player is very weak, and it can be overpowered, and they can end up in a lot of trouble.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas the original Germans didn't know that, because they didn't invest much in the way of resources. But most of the games I've seen in replay have shown that, which basically saying the simulations, even though differing, are capturing some kind of strategic element properly. And in Gettysburg, wouldn't that be interesting to see how the different games are capturing the various nuances associated with the assaults and then the results. So
It's funny you should mention that specific point because I was actually in the last time that we played Vakdam Rhine, which was
the
the
new one
later
or the
decision, the new one.
old? Okay.
I was actually in command of the German 7th Army, and I pushed hard enough on the American sector down there that they had to pull about 4 divisions down there to prevent a breakthrough, which created issues elsewhere.
So that meant that you were able to pressure around Bastogne
Yeah.
quite well.
I mean, I never had a breakthrough or anything like that, but I put a lot of pressure on.
Yeah, so their options would really go down in that case.
Mhm.
Yeah, anyway, that's really, yeah. So most of the games, the Bulge games I'm aware of, are capturing that. Gettysburg, I see a lot of different results. So anyway, I am interested in this thing of how well are the games in terms of how are they working in terms of capturing what we're trying to show. And obviously I'm interested in other things too, which is how much fun are they? So
Mhm.
fun really matters. So like I remember back in the day, I used to love Panzer Group Guderian because I thought, well, this thing is. I did eventually grow tired of it, but I thought it was just a lot of fun, and so fun really matters in these games a lot. And so one of the things in the original Quadra game is uh, we tried to get the victory conditions so that they were reasonably balanced, and that's a tough thing to do. And
Mhm.
you know, I won't say that we've done exactly the same in the last gamble. In fact, the situation that you showed, it looks will be very hard for the Allied player to pull out any kind of victory. However, that could have happened. And so again, you want a game that in some ways entertains and teaches both.
Mhm.
Entertains and teaches would be ideal. Um, but
As always, there's a balance.
right.
You
There's
got to
always
find the balance. And my balance might not be the same as everybody else's balance. Some people, to this day, are playing Bulge 65, right?
that's right. And I, go ahead. Uh, I don't think I would, I did play it a lot, but it's just so weird. You would like to tape over something over it in terms of what it says it is.
Mm-hmm.
But other things like Bitter Woods or most of these games will do pretty well. I mean, there are things I can see in games where I'll say, nope, I don't like that at all. That doesn't really reflect what should be happening in a Bulge game. Ardennes 44, this game looks like it goes pretty well often. It perhaps shows the Americans too weak in the South, but anyway, it's very tough to it's easy to criticize. It's very hard to do. Um,
Mm-hmm. All right, folks, we are just about
Bloody hell, this went too fast.
out of time. It does when it's magic like
well,
we've had tonight.
are there any questions or things that I didn't get to that people out there say I should have?
Uh, I think some of the questions I did put a couple up and pulled them up, but we had I might have gotten everything, to be
Okay,
honest.
good.
We don't get as much audience interaction on this show just because we've got a guest, and we would love it if the guest would speak,
Yeah,
which
well,
Danny has
in fact,
excelled at.
well, I'm really, Artie, you and I have communicated for years now to get this thing out,
Mm-hmm.
this game that you finally got it out. But this is my first time to be able to meet Dan, the fantastic man there in
With
Canada
his church warden pipe and his
with
Virginia
the
tobacco.
Talking
huge
about Ben, not
mosquito.
me, him.
We got a lot of Dannys and Dans and Daniels here tonight, actually. We'd like to give a shout out to all the Dans, Dannys, and Daniels
Yeah,
this
yeah.
evening.
Well, my mother was 90 today, so
Hmm.
that's so
Today?
today, and I called her and talked to her, and it's like, wow, Mom, I will not be able to do it, but that's some, and her name is Jean. I said, those are some good genes, Jean. So
Fair enough. All right, folks, we got to wrap it up. Danny, if you want to hang around for just a couple of minutes,
Sure.
we would be delighted. Everybody else, thanks so much for stopping by. We'll be back next week with a new show. Don't forget that we are moving to Sundays starting on February 9th, but there will be a show in the normal time slot on February 2nd. It will not be live. It will be a rebroadcast of the show we did with the Armchair Dragoons. Go check out all their content on their channel as well. So once again, Danny, thanks so much.
thank
For
you.
doing this with us tonight. And thank you, everybody, for coming out and hanging out with us tonight.